I never thought I would be on Reddit, of all places, posting about my broken marriage. However, I must get this out. For months, I've been gathering the details of my life, my betrayal, and my retaliation. And now I'm ready to share the entire story. Naturally, I will use a disposable account. I'm 34 years old, and my name is Alex. My 32-year-old wife, Sophie, recently brutally ended our 7-year marriage. In hindsight, the indications had been present for months, but I was too preoccupied with my life and career to notice them. It began modestly. Sophie first started staying late at work more frequently. I didn't give it much thought because she works in sales. Until she began changing her phone passwords, that is. Although we had always maintained an open phone policy, she became irate with me one evening when I casually brought it up at dinner. She said, "You're controlling." Alex, stop it. I should have recognized that as a warning sign. However, I didn't. The money followed. I began to notice odd payments on our joint account, including salon appointments during business hours, boutique shopping sprees, and pricey eateries I didn't know. Sophie dismissed my question with evasive justifications like, "Oh, it's just client meetings," or "I deserve a treat." I didn't follow up at the time. However, something didn't feel quite right. The gym followed. Instead of attending our regular gym, Sophie began going to a new one across town. She would arrive home in clothes I didn't recognize and hair done to perfection, as if she had just stepped out of a magazine. She appeared to be different. She would make me feel like I was the issue if I tried to discuss it, even though I felt something wasn't right. "You have paranoia. Alex, you're choking me. It's unbelievable that you don't trust me." The actual tipping point, however, was last week. Her phone buzzed on the counter while I was repairing our kitchen sink. A preview of a message from a man named Grant appeared. "I'm so excited about tonight, sweetie. He still doesn't know." My heart fell. Grant. Before we met, she was with her ex. She insisted that the man was merely a friend. Sophie looked like a supermodel when she got home that evening, and I showed her the note. I was astonished by her response. She offered neither a denial nor an apology. She only offered a nasty, frigid chuckle. As she tossed her luggage onto the couch, she remarked, "Well, I guess you're not as dumb as you look." Grant is now prosperous, partner in his company. Are you still mending things, or what? Do you have small business ideas in your head? I stood motionless as this stranger continued to stare at my wife. "I want you to sell the house," she replied, taking a folder from her bag. "Next month, Grant and I will move in together. He has too little space for us both." I spoke steadily. "Both of our names are on the house. I'm not trying to sell." She rolled her eyes. "Alex, you cannot afford the mortgage on your own. Avoid becoming pitiful. Simply sign the paperwork, pay your share, and find an inexpensive place to rent. Accepting less is what you're skilled at." She proceeded to our bedroom and destroyed our wedding pictures. She growled and tore them to pieces, saying, "You were always temporary. Grant is my true love. It has always been." Erin, Sophie's sister, unexpectedly arrived the following day. I had always considered Erin family, but not anymore. She informed me, "You're pathetic," with a sly smile. "Grant is capable of giving her the life she deserves. Simply sign the paperwork and go away." I said nothing. I refused to show them how hurtful what they had said was. I saw Sophie's smug smirk as I signed the first papers for the property sale. However, they were unaware of the full extent of it. They were unaware that I had been observing, recording, and getting ready. They believed I had no idea, but I was simply waiting for the appropriate opportunity. despite every dubious accusation, deceptive communication, and vicious act. They had committed a deadly error. Things are about to get real now. I've started working on my plan. Grant and Sophie believe they have triumphed. However, they are unaware of their own errors. As events develop, I'll provide updates, but for now, I have some calls to make. Stay vigilant. I wrote part 1 a few days ago. Much has occurred. I've had time to reflect, make plans, and start the process of exacting my retribution. I'm sure that some of you are asking why I'm so composed about this, why I haven't lost my mind and started acting out or having tantrums. The fact is that for months, if not years, I have been the one with a broken heart. My purpose is not to weep or plead. I'm here to hold Sophie and Grant accountable for their treatment of me. I didn't just stand by and watch as Sophie and Aaron went off to celebrate after I signed the house papers. I called a lawyer right away. I sought the best divorce lawyer I could find, not just any lawyer. Although he is pricey, money is irrelevant in situations like this. I filled him in on the whole story. He was horrified. He gave me his word that I would not allow them to simply walk all over me. His first recommendation was for me to take charge of our finances. I had to look farther because I had no idea how much they were manipulating me. Over the course of the following few hours, I downloaded statements, went through our joint accounts, and copied all of Sophie's spending records. Much of it appeared to be used for her meetings with Grant. The two of them had spent thousands on opulent meals, lodging, and shopping excursions. I felt ill from it. What was the most distressing aspect of the situation? In order to finance her affair, Sophie had been using our credit cards and depleting our money. I took some time to examine our investment accounts as well. I was aware that Sophie had been expressing to me for months her desire to sell some stocks and transfer all of her holdings to a new portfolio. I was unaware that she had been discreetly selling off our shares. She had other ideas, and one of them was to give Grant everything I had worked so hard for. However, I had already passed her. That same evening, we had our accounts frozen. Sophie won't have any more access, and Grant won't have any more money either. I wasn't giving them a single coin or a dime. Aaron called me the following day. I didn't say much, just a straightforward, icy, "I'll see you in court." She was upset that I had frozen the accounts and ruined Sophie's plans. She tried to guilt-trip me into unfreezing everything, saying it was the only way to avoid a messy divorce. When I stated that, I could hear the fear in her voice. Aaron wasn't really intelligent, and I could see she was just doing what Sophie was doing. But here was my opportunity to be in charge. Despite all of this, I continued my investigation. I went through the document trail for hours. I searched for any evidence that could support the divorce and aid in my victory, including old pictures, emails, and texts. It didn't take me long to discover something that infuriated me. During the first year of our marriage, Sophie and Grant exchanged a number of letters in which she discussed getting back together, with Grant following her marriage to me. She had stated in them that she was keeping me around for now, until the appropriate time. She had obviously been preparing this from the beginning. It was all there in black and white. The deception, the emotional blackmail, the betrayal. Knowing that those emails would be important in the days ahead, I saved a copy. Sophie was unaware that I was gradually assembling my arsenal, but she believed she had me surrounded. I made the decision to go see Jake, a friend with whom I hadn't spoken much recently, later that night. I've known him for ages. Although I was aware that he had experienced his fair share of relationship blunders, I really needed someone who could remain composed and wouldn't condemn me for what was about to happen. I told Jake everything, and he was furious. He shook his head and remarked, She really played you, man. Don't worry, though. I've got your back. Whatever you need, I'll be here to help. Over the course of the night, we successfully assembled the pieces. In addition to offering some other tactics for maintaining my advantage, he assisted me in searching through more of Sophie's social media accounts. Jake said, "People like that don't just disappear," and he suggested I go after Grant to expose him as a serpent. A trail is always present. Jake and I brainstormed several ways to look into Grant's business dealings, social media accounts, and any other personal relationships he may have. I reasoned that if I could reveal his shady actions, it would further ruin the life he was going to lose. I'm not just doing this to get even. Grant and Sophie intended to take all I had fought so hard to earn and leave me emotionally and financially empty. It's time for them to suffer the repercussions of their attempt to destroy me. I'm not rushing. I'm thinking long-term. I have patience. And I'm going to strike them right where it hurts. Be vigilant. The plan's best aspect is yet to come. 1 week has passed since Part 2's events. The situation has intensified, and the noose is gradually getting tighter. I have never been more concentrated, and everything I have done thus far has been well thought out. Despite how much it pains me to see Sophie and Grant living their little dream lives, I've been avoiding them and feel proud of the way I'm managing everything. The inevitable becomes closer with each step. I called a private investigator as soon as I had frozen our accounts. I needed someone who could assist me in researching Grant's past, including his financial transactions, business interactions, and any information that would link him to illicit activity, dubious transactions, or anything that might be used against him in court. Now, it was about exposing the whole web of lies and deceit they had been creating, not just about the money. I provided the researcher with all the information he required, including Grant's full name, business interests, known associates, and any further contacts that would be helpful. He got to work right away, and in a matter of days, I was sitting in front of a little mountain of intelligence. Grant had a series of unsuccessful business endeavors, some of which were genuine, and others of which weren't. Rumors circulated about undisclosed income, fraud, and relationships with dubious individuals. However, one particular item caught my attention. Several offshore accounts connected to a Cayman Islands-based business. Anyone with even a slight interest in finance would be paused by these accounts. I was going to make sure everyone knew that Grant had probably been laundering money, and there was a fair probability that the money he had been spending on Sophie's vacations, lodging, and pricey presents wasn't only coming from his savings. I held everything within me. Since this was my next move and I wanted to control the outcome, I kept Jake in the dark about my new discoveries. When all of this was revealed, I knew Sophie and Grant would collapse, and I was going to make sure the fall was as severe as possible. Sophie continued to text me in the interim, feigning that everything was wonderful between us. In an attempt to win me back, she would inquire about my well-being, whether I was getting enough rest, and even send me a few sweet texts. None of them received a response from me. No necessity existed. I was aware of her strategy. She continued to live in her little dream world with Grant, trying to lull me into a false feeling of complacency. However, things began to change. I saw that she appeared to become more frantic as I kept blocking her out. I learned that she had been hanging out with Aaron once more, perhaps to see what I would do next. I kept getting calls from Aaron, who left me lengthy voicemails telling me to calm down and that nothing was worth ruining the family over. Her stupidity was not something I had time for. She contributed to the issue just as much as Sophie did. I wasn't going to let Aaron divert my attention from what I was going to do because they were both complicit. Then a package arrived in the mail. I didn't know who sent it. The outside bore my name in block letters, yet it lacked a return address. When I opened it, my heart pounded. Within, I found a thick folder containing copies of bank statements, pictures, and, most damning of all, wire transfer information. I initially believed it to be an error of some sort, but as I turned the pages, I realized what I was in possession of: indisputable evidence of Sophie and Grant's financial deception. The foreign accounts I had previously discovered were genuine. They were authentic. Furthermore, for months, Sophie had been sending them sizable quantities of money that she had been stealing from our joint accounts. It was overwhelming for me. Sophie and Grant were not only having sex, they were also conducting business together and transferring funds into a scheme that was beyond my comprehension. I had to do something, and I had to do it quickly. Even though I was furious, I called Jake and said, "We need to go to the authorities." Jake didn't think for a moment. "You have everything, don't you?" I inhaled deeply. "Indeed. I have it all. This is it. We intended to bring them to justice, not merely reveal their affair." Over the course of the following 2 days, I organized all of the paperwork, emails, pictures, and wire transfers. Before I went to the authorities, I wanted to make sure that everything was in order. I contacted a reliable person at the local police department as soon as I was certain I had the material required to present a case. When I gave them the file, they were taken aback. The officer's eyes widened as he replied, "Alex, this is serious. You have them on fraud, money laundering, and—" He paused, taking another look at the file. "This is larger than I anticipated." I tried not to feel too vindicated as I nodded. "This has nothing to do with being content with my retaliation. This was to make sure Sophie and Grant were held accountable for their actions and that they couldn't harm anyone else." The days that followed were hectic. My hired investigator was putting in extra hours, gathering as much information as he could about Sophie's covert activities. The evidence was being taken seriously by the authorities, and I was aware that Grant's past would eventually catch up with him. I stayed away from Sophie during this period. She had absolutely no idea what I was doing. She was becoming more paranoid, and I could tell. She began to visit me more frequently, hoping to engage in conversation, but I was usually busy. She was no longer able to reach me. There was nothing they could do to stop the walls from closing in on them. This is just the beginning, so stay tuned. Everything appeared to be happening at a rapid pace, yet it also appeared to be unfolding slowly. The authorities were developing a case, the investigation was moving forward, and Sophie's facade was starting to come apart. I resisted the impulse to rush in and confront her, to hurl everything in her face, even though I knew the end was imminent. However, that wouldn't truly solve anything. Before I finally exacted my revenge, I had to make sure everything was perfect and that everything was in its proper position. Sophie's unexpected appearance one evening, her face contorted in a mix of bewilderment and despair, was the first indication that disaster was on the way. She was becoming more erratic and unpredictable, so I had been anticipating her visit for some time. Her cool, collected appearance had finally begun to give way to the pressure of knowing what was about to happen. As soon as I opened the door, she shook her voice and said, "Alex, I must speak with you." I did not invite her inside. Rather, I stood in the doorway with my arms folded and a stern scowl on my face. "How about?" She inhaled deeply, her eyes darting anxiously as though she were looking for a way out. "Almost everything. You've been staying away from me. We need to address this issue. I want to speak with you. We miss you." Her comments hit me hard, but I didn't back down. I had heard all the justifications, begging, and apologies before. She was following a script that I could almost recite, and I was determined not to fall for it again. Do you miss me? I said it again in a bland voice. Is that the case here? After all? Unable to look at me, she cast her eyes to her feet. I acknowledge my faults. I made a grave error. However, I didn't intend for it to get this far. Alex, I want to make things right. We are able to make things better. I stepped back, almost incredulously. Repair things? There is no way to fix this. For that, it is too late. As she went on, Sophie's voice grew lower, and her eyes began to well up with tears. Just give me a chance to explain, please. It was nearly comical. She was attempting to seem like this was all about her wanting to fix things while she stood in front of me. Now, more than ever, it was obvious that she was sad she was being caught, not sorry for what she had done. I responded, more icily than I meant to, I don't need an explanation. Everything is known to me. Her lips opened and closed as though she was having trouble finding the correct words, and her face lost color. What do you mean, exactly? I didn't respond to her. Rather, I moved to the side and grabbed the folder I had carefully packed. Without saying a word, I gave it to her and watched as she opened it with shaking hands. As she pieced everything together, she perused the documents, her face conveying the astonishment. Everything was in plain sight, including the pictures, the wire transactions, and the offshore accounts. You had me in your sights? Her voice broke as she whispered. No, I replied, maintaining my firm tone. You accomplished this on your own. Grant and you. Sophie's face was a mixture of incredulity and rage as she stared up at me. This is impossible. This isn't the intended outcome, Alex. For us, I was doing it. For our future. It nearly made me chuckle. Did you do it for our future? You did it for your own benefit. Sophie, you took advantage of me the entire time. Didn't you think I wouldn't figure it out? Her lip trembled, but she remained silent. Around her, I could see the walls collapsing. The truth was all that remained, and it was now impossible to avoid. I wasn't finished yet. Did you truly believe you could get away with this? I spoke. My voice got louder as I spoke. You thought that there would be no repercussions for betraying me, stealing from me and ruining my life? Sophie remained silent. She was unable to. Her barriers crumbled under the weight of her own falsehoods. She still made an effort to defend herself, though. You're not understanding, she remarked quietly. You're unaware of what he assured me of. He promised to improve everything. I could have anything I wanted, he said. Everything? I asked, practically making fun of her. Was it the purpose of this? You didn't think I was sufficient? That you had to destroy those who loved you in order to have it all? For a brief moment, I thought she was finally accepting responsibility. But then her head fell. However, that moment was short. Her eyes were filled with panic as she glanced up at me. Alex, you can't take everything away from me. I will lose everything, including Grant, my life, and my future. You don't want to do this, please. With my voice down to a whisper, I took a step toward her. Sophie, you've already lost everything, and I won't let you argue your way out of it this time. Tears stained her face as she shook her head. Just let me fix this, please. I'll do anything. I am able to correct it. I finally allowed my rage to show in my voice as I responded, You already had your chance. I will now hold you accountable for all your actions. Sophie sobbed helplessly as her knees gave up, and she fell to the ground. In that moment, I felt a silent sense of justice rather than satisfaction. That was the end. The match was over. I turned and left without turning around. I had fulfilled my obligations. I had no control over the rest. The days that followed were tense and uncertain. Sophie was desperate, not just angry. She attempted to reach me via phone, text, and even in person at my workplace, but I consistently ignored her. This was no longer about making amends. It was about her having to deal with the fallout from her actions. Although I was unsure of Grant's exact moment of discovery, I was certain that his world would soon collapse as well. I would be there to ensure that he fell more forcefully than Sophie could when it did. All I had planned for, all I had worked for, was finally happening. It was time to start the final chapter. The last confrontation was a jumble of the last few days. With each passing moment, Sophie's calls and messages grew increasingly urgent. I didn't answer. I was unable to. I needed to maintain my focus because I knew what was going to happen next. Sentimentality was no longer an option. Grant faced swift destruction. Even though I expected his reactions, nothing could have prepared me for how far he would go to defend himself. He attempted to negotiate the charges against him when the authorities arrived at his house. Naturally, they had lost interest in what he had to say. The web of lies that Sophie and he had woven over the years was too complex to break free from, and the evidence was indisputable. The police had already charged him with fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering after searching his accounts, freezing his assets, and gathering sufficient evidence. The biggest surprise, though, was when they discovered the secret offshore accounts that were connected to both Sophie and him and were loaded with money obtained through illicit means, including the money he had embezzled from me. Sophie's efforts to escape the repercussions were in vain. The probe began monitoring her every move. She tried to remain silent, knowing that eventually they would also detain her. I needed no more satisfaction than to see the sight on her face when they came for her world collapsing in real time. However, the most difficult portion was still to come. Retaliation was not the theme of the story's last act. It was about ending a phase of my life that had previously been characterized by ambition, love, and trust. I had one more meeting with my lawyer to ensure everything was in order before officially filing the accusations against them. I was still undecided, although I had wanted to file charges. I wasn't sure if I should let it go and go on, or if I wanted to drag it out in court, repeating everything. But as I sat there, going over the documents one last time, I understood that there was no true moving on, since this loss and this treachery would always be a part of me. I ultimately made the decision to choose a different strategy. I had already prevailed, so there was no reason to continue pursuing it in court. It was time for me to take what remained of my life and rebuild after Sophie and Grant destroyed everything they previously valued. The drama of a public trial wasn't necessary for me. I had already exacted my retribution. Knowing that I had prevailed in spite of everything was the true reward. Sophie received a prison sentence for her involvement in the financial crimes and her treachery, while Grant, ever the coward, attempted to get out of it by pleading. It was in vain, and he received a lengthy term of his own. Both of them wore defeated expressions as they exited the courtroom. I was overcome with a sense of closure. I didn't say anything at all. There was no grand speech or celebration. No necessity existed. I had been through too much to revel in their failure. It took me several months before I was able to begin moving on. I took back control of my finances, sold the house we shared, and began gradually reconstructing my future. Even though the scars still hurt, I refused to let them define who I was. I learned a valuable lesson that will guide me throughout my life. The loss of trust is irreversible, and sometimes just letting the past go and moving on was the best kind of retaliation. I moved to a little flat in the city, far from any memories of what had transpired. I concentrated on my work there, making sure to create a fresh future free from the poisonous effects of those who had formerly professed to love me. I kept in touch with Jake. I could not adequately thank him for his tremendous support. The only person I could still trust was him. We stopped discussing Sophie and Grant. The past was the past, and we both knew it. The moment has come to look ahead. I eventually made a new acquaintance. It didn't happen right away, but when it did, it felt perfect. I took my time, letting myself trust once more, but keeping in mind the lessons I had already learned. Although it wasn't simple, I was prepared. I felt the weight finally come off my shoulders for the first time in a long time. I have no idea what became of Sophie or Grant following their sentencing. I had closed that chapter of my life. After making their decisions, they now had to deal with the fallout. I, on the other hand, had a future to create and would never allow someone to take it away from me. Though it was mine, the path ahead was uncertain. I was eager to see where it would take me, but I had no idea